Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to dive into our next skill video, and we're going to talk about Arcana because that's how the alphabet works. Arcana is the skill you use to recall knowledge about several topics. It dives into your understanding of creatures like dragons and constructs, as well as planes of existence like the astral plane or netherworld. But before we get into what you're going to do with this skill, we should just make sure to remember what ability score it ties back to, and in that case, that is intelligence this time. This means that any intelligence-based class is already going to have a good modifier here, and then anybody who's looking to be a skill monkey, by increasing their intelligence to increase the number of skills they become trained in, are also going to have a good modifier for Arcana, so just keep that in mind. But with that, let's go ahead and jump into what you can do, as far as the actions, both untrained and trained with Arcana. There's only one untrained action with Arcana, unlike with Acrobatics where we had two, and this is Recall Knowledge. Now, Recall Knowledge comes up in a lot of classes, and just can come up in any point in any campaign. This is something that you can do either in combat or out of combat, and has uses both ways. So what is Recall Knowledge all about? Well, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it's not that you're suddenly learning something about some creature or some location you're in. You're remembering that. You've already gained this knowledge. You're recalling that knowledge that you already have to remember what are its weaknesses and immunities? What special skill does it have? For this area, this haunted place, what do I know about this haunt? Recalling knowledge is more interesting because at least that gives away in story why you would know this. You wouldn't suddenly just randomly know things you hadn't previously learned about, but sometimes it takes us a lot of work to recall that knowledge, and that's what this is about. So recall knowledge is a single action, and with that, you're going to ask a question of your GM, about whatever it is you're trying to remember this information about. So for creatures, this could be all sorts of things. What's the creature's weakness? Does it have any immunities? What's its worst saving throw? And those are specific, obviously, to combat, but that's some examples. For creatures, the DC that you have to beat is actually listed in the stat block. For other topics, the GM will set the DC. So if you want to, say, know something about a specific house that you're in, or this book you found, they'll set it and they'll probably work off of the standard DC list. This action is a big deal for multiple classes that really make heavy use of that, and we'll get into that when I get a little further into this video. There are also a few trained actions. Now, again, these aren't specific to Arcana, like Recall Knowledge. Yes, you do it with Arcana, but you can also recall knowledge with nature or religion or occultism. A lot of what we're going to talk about will apply to several of these knowledge skills, and Arcana is just, you use it for specific areas, like I mentioned about dragons and constructs and things like Netherworld. Your GM will let you know if you need to recall using Arcana specifically, but here are some of the trained actions. Remember, you just need to be trained, and then you get access to these actions. The first is decipher writing. Now this takes 10 minutes, and yeah, you're just trying to understand some arcane writings that aren't in a language you just obviously know. The next is identify magic. This also takes 10 minutes, and you identify a spell or other forms of magic of the arcane tradition. You could use the same thing for nature or for occultism, but it's all related to that tradition instead. Learn a spell is a 1-hour activity, and you add a spell to your spell book. Again, arcane spells, because we're talking about Arcana, but that's definitely something you can do. And finally is borrow a spell. Now this is specifically if you're a prepared caster, something like a wizard, and you can, if you have another team member who has a spell book, or maybe they're a witch and their familiar knows their spells because they kind of act like a spell book, you can borrow a spell that they know and put it in your spell list for the day. So you suddenly can use the spell that you borrowed from them. Okay, so now let's go ahead and dive into the skill feats that you can take. A lot of these are more tied to kind of the exploration or downtime phases and less into combat, but that comes up occasionally as well. So Arcane Sense requires level 1 and trained in Arcana, and you get access to detect magic at will as an arcane innate spell. So if you are an arcane spellcaster, you've already got access to this as a cantrip, not a big deal. But if you're not, and you simply are trained in Arcana and want to have detect magic, great, this gives you easy access. Quick identification, level 1, trained in Arcana. This allows you to identify magic, which we talked about as one of our actions we could take while being trained, but this allows you to do it in 1 minute rather than 10 minutes, or as you get up higher, it actually reduces the amount of time. As a legendary, you could do it in 1 action, which allows it to be something you use in combat, which is kind of cool. Recognize spell. This is actually a reaction. It requires you to be level 1 and trained in Arcana, and allows you to see if you can recognize a spell that somebody just cast. Now, if you already have a spell, meaning the spell that they cast, as a prepared spell you know in your repertoire, you don't need to do any roll. You simply know what it is. But if you don't have it like that, this is a good way for you to identify what spell they're casting, even when you don't know what it is, as long as it's in the arcane tradition. So you still have to do a roll to see if you know what it is, but at least this allows you to do it as a reaction. You're not just having to ignore it or doing some kind of check later. Reveal true name. So this is still level 1, and you need trained in Arcana, but you also need trained in Intimidation, so kind of a combo skill feat. And for 2 actions, you can try to intimidate a creature by speaking its true name and giving it a command. If you even just succeed, you don't even have to critically succeed, it'll do your bidding out of fear of you, but it won't be your friend afterward. Trick magic item, level 1 as well, trained in Arcana, 1 action, and you try to use your magic item you normally couldn't. So let's say you're a monk with Arcana and you've got a wand. Normally you can't use that, but you could with trick magic item. You just have to succeed at a check. It's still, for Arcana, it has to have the arcane tradition, so it depends on the spell and the wand. Anything with the arcane spell tradition, you'd be able to try to trick with Arcana and the trick magic item skill feat. Assured identification. Here we are at level 2, expert in Arcana, and you can't critically fail to identify magic, and you won't miss the fact that an item is cursed, which can be really terrible. So normally you can identify something and still not know it's cursed. You don't have to worry about that anymore, which is great. Eye of the Arc Lords. This is uncommon, and I forgot to mention we had one before that was rare. I'll put that on the screen for the other one. This is level 2, expert in Arcana, and you have to have Arcane Sense, which was a previous skill feat here. You gain a 3rd eye you can open that provides many buffs to vision, detecting magic, and seeking foes. You do become dazzled after it closes, but it's still very cool. And it lasts long enough that you might be fine, that it becomes dazzled after combat. Magical Shorthand, level 2, expert in Arcana. We're kind of on that place right now. Massive boosts to learner spell activity. It becomes faster, cheaper, better success, less severe failures. Really highly suggested if you're ever going to try to learn a spell, like add things into your spell book. Crichton's Cognitive Crossover. This is another uncommon skill feat. And in this case, you're choosing 2 of your knowledge skills. Now, Arcana needs to be one of them if we're talking about the Arcana side of this, but use this as a reaction when you fail to gain knowledge from recall knowledge. So you did recall knowledge with Arcana, let's say, and you failed to acquire any knowledge from that. So now you can try again with the other skill you chose as part of the feat. This is just a backup in case you really wanted to gain something, some sort of knowledge, and you have a way to get around that first failure. So kind of interesting. Quick recognition. This is level 7, requires master in Arcana, and you must have the recognize spell skill feat that we talked about just a little bit ago here. And once per round, you can recognize spell as a free action, which means anytime in the round, as long as it's triggered properly. This would mean that you could use your reaction to do it as well as a free action. So anyway, you've got a lot of chances to recognize spells now, which is very cool. Unified Theory. This is a level 15 legendary in Arcana skill feat, and you can use Arcana when you would otherwise need to use nature, religion, or occultism. Also, you don't get a penalty for using Arcana when it's a worse option. This allows Arcana to be the only knowledge skill you need to care about. which is a huge boost for any class that wants to be recalling knowledge. Investing in multiple is hard, and being able to do any check with Arcana is a huge win. So very, very good feat. Yes, it's not to level 15, but at that point, you're going to be happy you have it. So as you can see, some of the skill feats really do add a lot to combat. There's a ton of exploration advantage as well in there. Not a lot of social uses for Arcana. I mean, unless you happen to be conversing with a wizard or something, then maybe there's some fun things there. But generally, it's in those kind of other realms of play. Arcana is the first one we're talking about that plays a role in downtime, really. I mean, we only had acrobatics before this, so it kind of makes sense. And while downtime may not be considered as much a pillar of play as exploration and social and combat, it really is, though. And so it really does play a role in that. Arcana can help a lot with gathering more spells, learning them, even using your Arcana to help you recall knowledge about things that might be helping you in downtime. But there are also a few classes that take specifically high advantage of Arcana. The obvious one being Wizard. They get it for free. They're going to want to add spells to their spell book, so learn a spell. But then also the Magus, which is Wizard adjacent. So you also have a spell book. You're going to want to learn some spells there. Then there's the Thaumaturge. Thaumaturges can get a lot more out of recall knowledge. Now they have a very special skill for doing that, but they can also get some nice advantage out of Arcana. Then there's witches and sorcerers, summoners that, depending on their subclass, are trained in Arcana out the gate and may get specific advantage from going deeper in there. We talked about some of the recall knowledge advantages. For some of the skill feats, they still like to be able to recall knowledge. The Wizard and Magus just stand out kind of ahead on their own. Again, because they have spell books and they're going to want to learn spells that way. Although the Witch is kind of similar, where you've got your familiar that is your spell book. So not trying to ignore that at all. Rangers, investigators, again, I mentioned thaumaturges. They all gain benefits out of recalling knowledge. In fact, I'm going to call it investigators here because they want to recall knowledge, especially now with some of the changes in the remaster. They can probably recall knowledge all the time, depending on their subclass. They get there's one specific subclass that can do it as part of one of their other class features. So you might be doing it a lot, but all three of those are classes that really get a lot out of recalling knowledge. So think about Arcana if you're going to play any of them as well. In exploration, when magical wards or magic objects become obstacles, you're going to want probably Arcana. That's very likely going to be the skill that you're going to be requested to use in order to help understand what type of items you're dealing with. You might even find that there's some great source of income coming out of your Arcana. Maybe you're identifying magic items for guilds or something similar. So don't ignore Arcana when it comes to that pillar of play. When using it in combat, it's almost exclusively for recall knowledge, unless you're going to be identifying spells. So those are kind of the two uses, but recall knowledge comes up a lot more. When you're looking at a monster stat block, GMs, this is for you. You'll see, I'm showing an example on screen right now. You'll see that it lists along with the rest of the information in the monster stat block what skills can be used to recall knowledge and what needs to be rolled in order to recall knowledge. So while the player who's recalling knowledge does need to ask a question, you still need to be able to beat that number. So an example of this might be a player saying, I want to use Arcana to recall knowledge about that adamantine dragon. Does it have any weaknesses or resistances? The player then rolls, and then as GM, you check it against the listed DC. And let's say that they succeed. You might tell them only the weapons made of the strongest metals can fully penetrate its scales. Or you can just be very direct and say, it has resistance 15 to all physical damage except adamantine. Depends on the game you like to play and what your players are into, but just some thoughts, some options for you. If it was a crit success, you might say, ooh, you recalled even more about the creature than you expected as memories came flooding back. And what else would you like to know? And they might ask another question, or you might just give them other information about the adamantine dragon. So there we go, another skill down. I hope you found this helpful. I hope that it makes you want to use Arcana and things like recall knowledge. That's really a part of the game that I love. Using these knowledge skills in situations you don't use them in other systems makes them a lot of fun. As always, leave comments down below if you've got things that you thought I didn't cover, or more things you'd like to know, or you've got an idea for another video. Just remember, as always, adventure on.